So I'm going to use git from a terminal. And I'm going to use that one to get my code. So here I have a repository, or sorry, a folder called 2020. And under that folder, I want to download this new repository. So what I'll do is I'll do a git clone manually, git clone. I'll go in and I'll find the repository that I want to download. In this case, this is the repository we want to download. Copy that repository, either by just copying the URL or copying this link down here. I'll go back, I'll paste that into my terminal, and then I'll give it some kind of folder name for it. Either it'll put it in the folder name with this name right here, or you can actually do a space and then put in whatever folder name you want. And I'll just name it day 3 right here, and I'll press enter. Now it'll clone it into that folder. And that's actually how simple it is. So now with day 3, if I do a list, you'll see I have my source and my test folder right here and 2 solution files. So now I can go to Visual Studio. And hopefully I can open this project. So now I'll just try and open it. Now this is probably what you'll end up doing as a team anyway. Either cloning it down or again, finding the right GitHub repo. And day 3. And I want to open this. And remember, open the solution, not the CS project. The solution, that's the one you want to open. Normally, you can actually figure it out itself, but I've seen with some IDE versions that it can't open the solution if you select the project. So here we have the course for today. The dependency, again, is .NET Core and a NuGet package, which is XUnit to do the testing. So those are dependencies I have in my setup. The source code today is kind of layered, right? We have a database layer, which just has a symbol, the one I just showed you, a simple C# file that just contains a fake database, in-memory database, which is just a simple list right here. There's no SQL or anything like that. It's just a simple list where I can add customers. If you guys want to move forward with this today, you can add the rest of the CRUD to this database. So you have update, you have delete, and you have read all and stuff like that. We'll just wait with that. I have some models, and that's pretty much just customer right now. So this is a customer model. One thing you can notice right here is the small question mark here right after the int value. And that's because out of the box, our types should actually have a value, right? If you guys remember, a type cannot be set to null. So in Java, you cannot set int equals null, int cheese equals null. That's not allowed. But if you put in this small question mark right here, that means that this is actually nullable, a nullable type. And why did I do that? Because I don't know if I always have an ID, because when I create a new customer, he doesn't have an ID yet. And to avoid having to set that to -1 or something, I just allow it to be null. So that's kind of how simple it is to make things nullable in C#. Then I have some constants like I did the other times as well. And here you can find the different exception texts, just like you could last time, yesterday. And then we have the service, which is where you guys need to fix the code. I went a step further today and I actually decided to try and put in some comments. Yes, madness, I know, but hopefully that can help you a little bit to kind of find solutions for these different areas. And create and return customer object with all incoming properties, and there's no ID. So you'll have to somehow figure out how you can create a customer object, right, from the customer class without the ID. And then you have to add it, return it, sorry, you don't add it to any database right here. Because the second function, that's actually where you both create and add it. And here you can use the same function to create and then just add it later on. It's up to you. Get all customers from the database. Find customer in the database. So here you can use a for loop if you want to go over all customers. Or if some of you want to challenge yourself a little bit, you can start looking at a framework we'll start using later on called LinkU or Link. I'll just give you a very brief overview right here. Notice I just went to tutorials teacher, and there's actually a guide on link right here because it's a huge add-on. Now with link, you start getting methods like you're used to from SQL databases. So in a list, you can start doing things like you can get the first value, you can start to group or join like you're used to in SQL. You can order, you can select where. If, for instance, I want to find all where the ID is X, right? Then I can use that. There's also a find. But that's actually with the first and first or default. You can go and you can find the first one with a specific ID. So I'll show you this later today. But if you want to challenge yourself and you feel that a loop is just too annoying or something like that, go and check this one out if you want to. So the final one, the search customer, is a bit more tricky. Here you are kind of forced into using a switch statement because you can actually pick a search field in this test right here. That means I can search by first name, last name, or birth date, or ID, or whatever I want. So we need to kind of take this string and figure out what field we want to search on and return those customers that are within the search values. And how do we test all of this? Well, just like yesterday and the other days, I've added a service test to prove that when you guys are done, everything should pass. And again, no, you cannot just set all to assert true down here. That's not allowed. You need to kind of fix your code. So this is kind of not your code to change. So first test is create with first names with less than 2 characters will return an exception. So what I try to do here is I try to use the create method, but with a first name of only a single letter. And that should actually throw an exception, argument exception. And I'll just show this one and then you guys can get going. So if I jump into the service right here, you'll notice I call the create function in the service. And I expect it to throw this argument exception if the first name only contains a single letter in this case. Let's try and jump into the service. So what I'll do is I will find that create method and I'll just make an if statement right here. First name dot length, whoops. And to those of you who think there's more I can do here, you are welcome to do it because this could actually also be null. So I could also make a null check if I wanted to. That's not the test I'm testing right now. So I ask if first name length is less than 2, then I need to throw this exception, right? I'll throw a new exception, an argument exception. So again, I'm kind of forcing you guys to consider what will happen in different scenarios. And if I throw that exception, of course, I also need to put in the right message in the exception. And again, you just did that by adding in the parentheses of the exception, I can add a message. And again, you can see that right here when you mouse over. I throw an argument exception with a specific message. And right now the message is just from my constants. So it's just in here, first name must be 2 or more characters. That's the exception. Okay, so that was the first. I can now run my unit test. Let's just try and do it. So that's kind of what you need to do today. And again, hopefully in the test class, there should be a lot of help about how you should kind of customize this. For instance, when I create a customer with first name, last name, and birth date, and all these properties are defined up here, or variables, when I define that customer, he should, of course, not have an ID afterwards, and he should have first name, last name, and birth date, okay? So when I create a customer, but I've not added him to the database yet, he shouldn't have an ID. Step 2 is when I create an ad with valid data, then he should actually have an ID, and in this case, it would be ID of 1. So you should have a lot of help right here to kind of figure all of these out. We have the find, and we have the search area. So there's a lot of things in here that I kind of check and validate. So there's a lot of exceptions you need to guard yourselves against. And then the final one is we do some searching, and hopefully we find the one we are looking for in the search right here. And here's actually also some help if you need with the switch case. I've tried to make some helpers down here as well. If you can need some pointers there, it's in the test class as well. Just for the fun of it. So the for each, if we try to kind of break this for each down and see how that is now converted into this single line right here, let's try and have a look. First of all, here is the list that I want to search, right? That's the list I want to look into to find this specific customer. And you have the same one right here. That's the list I want to search for. Now on that list, there's a method available called find, because this is a generic list. And that method contains the same information. First of all, I'm going to break it down to using this statement, the Lambda expression right here. The first part is actually defining that for each customer in my list, I want to do something, right? So for each customer in my list, pretty much the same thing that you're seeing right here. For each customer in my list, and I could call this anything. This could be called Smokey Joe if I wanted to. I just had to put that same name in every area on the other side of the equal bigger than sign. Okay, so it's just a name. Just like the name I decided up here, it's just a name. And then the second thing is actually the if statement. Right here, I'm using the if statement. If the customer's ID equal the customer ID, I do the same thing here. I can just put in that question mark right there. I'll get to that in a second, the question mark. If that's the case, then return the customer. And just behind the scenes, this find right here will actually, as you can see in the method signature, it'll actually return a customer in the end. So it's the same thing we're doing with the for loop. We just kind of wrap it into this Lambda expression and then use a method to do it. And I might as well just tell you, get used to Lambda expressions, because they are pretty much used in any of the scenarios we are going to use later on. Both for TypeScript and for C#, we use Lambda expression. And Java uses it now as well in most cases, so it's not a new thing for Java either. Maybe that was badly said, because it is actually kind of new in Java and C#, but it's not new for Java developers to switch to this Lambda expression. So that's a Lambda expression. And right now it's a Lambda expression passed into a method for generic lists. But in general, this is what it does behind the scenes. It pretty much just runs over a loop of a list. It loops over that list, and then depending if the scenario in here is true or false, it'll return that customer. Now this guy will find, if I have multiple customers in the list that has this ID, it'll return the first one. Okay, so it'll go through the list and bang, it finds a customer with that ID, it'll return it. And if there's another one lower, you won't see him, right? So if you have multiple customers with the same ID, you'll still only get one. I think that's an important note with the find. I'll just keep this here so you guys have a reference later on. This will be put on GitHub, by the way. Okay, so that was kind of the Lambda expression in the find method. And again, if you don't get this yet, it's okay, because we'll use a lot of this when we start using link queue. Later on, we'll use Lambda expressions all the time. And the same when we move to TypeScript, you'll see them again and again. Perfect question. When you see things grayed out in my methods, it's not something I wrote. It's actually something, notice I just deleted it and came back. It's actually something that gets just as a helper to me, that this is the match you need to find. Whoops. This is the match you need to find. So it's just in a writer, it tries to help me out what I should put in here. Great question. And also, while I'm here, I forgot to say this question mark right here after the object is actually a null check. So if I didn't have that question mark and the customer was null, I would actually get a null reference exception, right? But with this guy right here, it'll just ignore this object if it's null. So it won't send me an exception, it'll just ignore it. So this is an easy way to do null reference exception tests if you don't want to throw an exception, okay? Maybe it's, again, it depends on your coding style. Maybe you would rather want the exception to see there are null customers in your list, which is bad. But you could also guard yourself by saying, if there are null reference, I don't care right now. I'll just skip the null database items and keep going. That's a question mark. But again, if you see grayed out areas, it's either stuff I don't need, I can remove that, or it's actually the IDE trying to help me specifying what should be in here. Sweet. You'll see it here as well, actually. This is not something I wrote either. This is just the system trying to tell me the customer is actually a list of customers because I choose the var right here. You'll notice if I put list customers in here, it will actually remove that because now it knows it's a list of customers. But when I put in the var keyword again, it'll say, if you didn't know it, this is actually a list of customers. That's not something I wrote. Okay, so here we are using another generic find, which is the find all. The difference is the find all will actually find everybody in the list with the specific keyword. So in this case, it'll find all customers with the ID of 1 or 2 or whatever. But again, hopefully there's only one, because this is unique identifier for a customer. So it should only return 1. So I could just have used the find instead. But since my method depends me to return a list of customers, right here there's a list of customers, it's just easier to say find all, and then I'll just hopefully get one customer back. Same idea with the Lambda expression in here. You'll see I put in a customer and I say if the ID match. If I go further down, you'll see the same one, find all. But this time I say if the first name match or if the last name match, right? So that's how easy it is to reuse these different Lambda expressions. Now I have a fast way to just switch between these different areas that I want to search for in my customer. And by the way, yes, I could just have made for loop for all of these, but notice how small my code base gets here because I'm just using these small tricks with the find and find all. And again, Lambda expressions are a pain to get used to in the beginning, but trust me, when you learn Lambda expressions, your code will be so much easier to read and write compared to making for loops all the time. And also, you also save a lot of code that you need to unit test, because a for loop, if you miss a parameter, if you put in a wrong, like if you use int I equals 0 and by mistake you put in 1 or you forgot to -1 on the length and all of that, well, with these Lambda expressions, you'll save all of that hassle because behind the scenes it builds all of that for you and you won't fail on that part at least. I changed my customer service a little bit because I want to show you guys a little bit about, I know again, I'm not the unit tester. That's not my job. That's the SDM teachers. But I want to just show you guys a small thing when you do unit tests. So when I run my tests, I have one that fails right now. One of the powers of unit testing is actually that you can get a lot of information inside the test that fails. So let's try to expand this one, and I can see I have it failed at tests in here. And here's my test that fails. And when I select that test, I actually get a lot of information right here about the test. So this is the test that fails. And when you guys read a test like this, you can actually read it like this is the test that failed, and here's the failure. And that's where it gets exciting, because you can actually see I expected this one to return a certain exception of the type invalid data exception, but I actually got a null exception, right? So it's the wrong exception I'm getting back. And I had a few questions about this. That's why I'm showing it, because that is something you need to start using. Also, it could be a number. So it'll also say if you are trying to get, you added a new customer to the database. So you expect there to be 3 customers after you added 3 customers. But for some reason there are 8 because there's a loop somewhere that fucks up. I don't know. Then you should actually see, I expected there to be 3 customers, but there was actually 8 customers, right? So you can get some great information in these tests if you want to. Let's fix this one that I failed right here. Zoom in. So here I return a null exception, which is wrong. I should actually again return invalid data exception. Another thing you can notice right here is the invalid data exception is actually from a package called system.io. That's not a default package in your classes. So you might have to either manually or using Alt-Enter import this package right here to use that one. Okay, that's another important note. Again, when you install ReSharper in your Visual Studio on Windows, or you start using Writer, it'll actually automatically, when you add a class, it'll automatically do the import for you. That's one of the great things about these extensions to our IDEs, is automatically when you write an exception, new exception, blah, blah, you press save, it'll automatically do the import for you if you don't have that class available. Good, let's try and rerun the tests, and now it should pass. There we go. I'm also just going to spend a couple of seconds here talking about the link or link queue, because now that I already opened up the box about these different Lambda expressions, you're actually ready to start using link if you want to. So link provides a lot of different things you can actually use just like you would with a database. So all of a sudden, each list you have in your system is actually a database, okay? And you can start making crazy queries to these links. So let me just try for the fun of it to do the same thing I did with the find right here, this one. Let's instead try and do the same thing, but this time I'll try and use link instead, just to show you how you can use that one. So I'll say return, I'll take the list, and I will, instead of using these find and find all, I want to go and use one called first or default. Now, if you noticed, it said using link, and that's because if you don't have something built in that can autocomplete this for you, you won't be able to find this method until you actually start using system.link in your class. And that's a very important note, because it won't even show up in your IntelliSense in Visual Studio out of the box. It won't show first or default method in your IntelliSense until you import that link library. Okay? So you can't write first or default, it won't even show up and help you. So I think that's important to know. Now, when I have this, I can make the exact same query like this one. Okay, so I didn't write this predicate, but it's the exact same query. So why use this? Why not just use the find? That's completely correct. You might as well just use the find, no problem. But here it'll actually say, if I do find a customer, I'll return him. And if I don't find the customer, I'll return null. So you won't get an exception. The find will give you an exception if it didn't find it. But if you want that exception thrown, link also provide one called first. And that's the same idea. It'll throw an exception if you don't find it. But link has a lot more than just this simple find statement. You can actually do a lot of great things with link. There's an entire tutorial for link. You can sort your array. You can order your array. You can find first or default. You can split up things. You can order by descending. Everything you would expect to be able to do in a table in SQL, you can pretty much do that.